Imagine standing as best man at your best friend's wedding, only to reveal he's plotting to fire you and steal your life's work. Mateo's story is a masterclass in betrayal. If this chills you, hit like and share your worst friend horror below. We're just getting started.
Thanks, Eliza, for this platform. Sharing how I exposed Julian's web of lies was cathartic. Now you'll see how I turned his scheme into my triumph. I'm standing at the head table of the grand ballroom at the Meridian Hotel, microphone in my sweaty palm, looking out at 300 wedding guests who have no idea they're about to witness a massacre. The crystal chandeliers I personally selected during the building's design phase cast perfect light across Julian's beaming face. He's sitting next to his bride Sarah in her $8,000 Vera Wang gown, completely unaware that in about 30 seconds, I'm going to project the email that will destroy his life onto the massive screens behind me. Ladies and gentlemen, I begin, my voice steady despite the fury burning in my chest. They say every great structure needs two things, vision and foundation. Julian raises his champagne flute toward me, that familiar cocky grin spreading across his face. The same grin he wore when he asked me to be his best man 3 months ago. The same grin he had when he planned to fire me right after this reception. My best friend made me his best man just to fire me after the wedding, so I gave a toast that destroyed his life. 7 days ago, I was still living in blissful ignorance. It was Tuesday afternoon and I'd stopped by Julian's corner office to grab the Hendrix project files. His assistant wasn't at her desk, so I walked right in like I had 1,000 times before. We'd built Croft and Garcia architecture from nothing, 2 guys in a garage with a handshake deal and a dream of designing buildings that would outlast us both. The printed email was sitting face up on his mahogany desk, and my name in the subject line caught my eye: Post-wedding restructuring Mateo transition plan. My hand started shaking as I read Julian's words to our board of directors. Mateo has served his purpose as the technical foundation, but vision requires a singular voice. The firm's future depends on streamlined leadership, and frankly, clients respond better to a single point of contact. I recommend we transition Mateo out within 60 days of my return from honeymoon. We can position it as his choice to pursue other opportunities. 15 years of friendship, 15 years of late nights, shared victories, and building something beautiful together, all of it crumbling in a few paragraphs of corporate speak. But the line that made my blood turn to ice was at the bottom. Mateo's technical skills were invaluable during our startup phase, but as we've grown, it's become clear that clients see him as the numbers guy while viewing me as the creative visionary. This transition will allow the firm to fully embrace its artistic identity. Numbers guy, after I'd personally designed the structural systems for every major project we'd ever landed. I took a photo of that email with trembling fingers, then carefully placed it back exactly where I'd found it. Julian would never know I'd seen it, at least not until Saturday night. 3 months earlier, Julian had asked me to be his best man at Café Luna, our favorite rooftop spot overlooking the downtown skyline. Half the buildings we could see from our table had our signature somewhere in their bones. Mateo, brother, he'd said, actual tears in his eyes as he reached across the table, I need to ask you something important. The late afternoon sun was hitting the glass facade of the Morrison Tower just right, making our design glow like molten gold. I remember feeling so proud in that moment, so grateful for the partnership we'd built. You're not just my business partner, Mateo, you're the brother I never had. I need you standing beside me when I marry Sarah. Will you be my best man? I'd said yes immediately, of course. We'd hugged right there on the restaurant's terrace while other diners smiled at what they probably thought was a proposal. Julian had laughed and wiped his eyes, saying he was just emotional about the wedding, about how much our friendship meant to him. Now, standing here with the microphone in my hand, I can see that same Morrison Tower through the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows. But the golden glow looks different tonight. It looks like a funeral pyre. You're the brother I never had, that's what he'd said. Brothers don't plan to stab each other in the back the moment the wedding cake is cut. An hour after finding that first email, I'd done something I'd never done before. I'd hacked into Julian's computer. 15 years of trust, and it took me less than 5 minutes to crack his password. It was visionary mind, of course it was. What I found in his sent folder made the firing plan look like a love letter. Email after email to our biggest clients, systematically rewriting the history of our partnership. To the Hendricks Group, Julian has always been modest about his genius. Mateo handles the boring structural stuff while Julian creates the magic. To Morrison Development, Julian's artistic vision transformed your project from a simple office building into an architectural landmark. Every innovative design solution I'd sweated over, every late-night breakthrough that had saved a project, every client relationship I'd cultivated with handshakes and honesty, Julian had been quietly taking credit for all of it. The Riverside Cultural Center's revolutionary cantilever system that had won us 3 industry awards, Julian told the client he'd sketched the concept on a napkin during lunch. The Morrison Tower's energy-efficient facade that had been featured in Architectural Digest, Julian's commitment to sustainable design, according to the email he'd sent to the magazine. I sat in his leather chair, the chair in the office that was supposed to be equal to mine, reading message after message where my best friend had systematically erased me from our own success story. My jaw was clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. But the worst part wasn't the stolen credit. It was how natural Julian sounded in those emails, how easily the lies flowed from his fingers. This wasn't a recent decision driven by wedding stress or business pressure. This was who he'd always been, and I'd been too trusting to see it. That evening, I drove to my parents' house in Riverside, needing the comfort of my mom's cooking and my dad's terrible jokes. They'd been so proud when Julian and I started the firm, telling everyone in their neighborhood about their son, the architect who was building the city's skyline. But when I walked into their modest kitchen, they had papers spread across the table and excitement lighting up their faces in a way I hadn't seen since my college graduation. "Mijo," my mother called out, practically bouncing on her toes. "Perfect timing, show him Roberto." My father held up official-looking documents with the letterhead of our firm, investment papers. My stomach dropped before I even saw the numbers. "Julian said it was a sure thing, Mijo. He said you two were going to be rich together and he wanted family to benefit from the success." Dad's weathered hands shook slightly as he pointed to the bottom line. "Our entire retirement savings, $340,000. Julian personally guaranteed the returns." My mother was beaming. "He said the firm was going public next year and this was our chance to get in early. Such a good boy, that Julian, thinking of us like family." I stared at those papers, feeling like I was going to vomit. Julian had taken their money 2 months ago, right around the time he'd started planning my exit. He'd convinced my parents to invest their life savings in a company he was about to destroy by removing its co-founder. That's wonderful," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant. "Really wonderful." I couldn't tell them, not yet, not until I figured out how to protect them from the nuclear bomb Julian was about to detonate in all our lives. By Wednesday morning, I realized Julian hadn't just planned my professional execution, he'd been systematically destroying my personal relationships too. Marcus, who'd been my friend since college, called me around lunch. "Hey man, we need to talk. Julian's worried about you." "Worried about what?" "He says you've been acting paranoid lately, talking about conspiracy theories, maybe having some kind of breakdown. We're all concerned, Mateo. When's the last time you took a real vacation?" I felt the ground shifting under my feet. "Marcus, what exactly did Julian tell you?" "Just that you've been making wild accusations about the business, claiming he's trying to push you out. He showed us some emails you sent him. They were pretty intense, man. Maybe you should talk to someone." Emails I'd never sent, accusations I'd never made. Julian had been planting seeds for weeks, maybe months, preparing everyone for my paranoid breakdown so that when he fired me, it would look like a mercy killing. By Thursday, 3 more friends had called with the same script. "We're worried about you, man. Julian says you've been acting strange lately." Each conversation felt like another nail in my coffin, another relationship poisoned by Julian's careful manipulation. The genius of it was breathtaking in its cruelty. He hadn't just planned to fire me, he'd planned to make me look crazy for fighting back. Thursday night, I found myself standing alone in the empty grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, watching the wedding planners make final adjustments to the floral arrangements. White roses and baby's breath, Sarah's choice, though Julian had probably taken credit for the vision behind the design. I walked to the head table, to the exact spot where I'd be standing in 2 days to give my best man's speech. The massive projection screens flanked the stage, ready to display the happy couple's photo montage during dinner. I designed this room's acoustics myself, ensuring perfect sound distribution to every corner. That's when it hit me. Julian hadn't just made me his best man out of friendship or tradition. He'd chosen me for the humiliation factor. He wanted me to stand up in front of everyone we knew, smile like a good little soldier, and toast his success right before he destroyed my life. He wanted me to be complicit in my own execution. I pulled out my phone and stared at the photo of Julian's email, then looked up at those massive screens. A cold clarity settled over me, replacing the hot anger that had been burning in my chest for 2 days. He wants me to smile and toast his success right before he destroys my life, I whispered to the empty ballroom. Perfect. I'll give him a toast he'll never forget. The rage was still there, but now it had direction. Now it had purpose. Julian had spent months planning my destruction with surgical precision. Time to show him what a real architect could build. Friday night, 11:45 p.m. The bachelor party was winding down at O'Malley's, and I was walking back to our table when my phone buzzed with a group text notification. The groomsmen chat, all 8 of us, including Julian. Julian *, guys, I need to tell you something about Mateo. He's been acting really strange lately, making wild accusations about our business. I'm really worried about his mental state. He's been talking about conspiracy theories all week. My blood turned to ice as I watched the responses pour in real time. Mike *, shit man, that's rough. What kind of accusations? Julian * claims I'm trying to push him out of the firm, that I'm stealing credit for his work. Completely delusional stuff. I've been covering for him at work, but I'm scared he might do something drastic. David *, poor guy's been acting weird all week. Don't worry, Jay, we got your back. Mateo, get help. Tom, maybe he shouldn't be best man if he's having a breakdown. Julian *, no, I can't abandon him now. That's what best friends do. They stick together even when things get tough. I stared at my phone in the dim bar light, watching my closest friends turn against me in real time. Julian wasn't just firing me, he was systematically destroying every relationship I had, making himself look like the loyal friend trying to help his mentally unstable buddy. The cruelest part, he wanted me to see it happening. He wanted me to know how completely isolated I was. Friday morning, 8:00 a.m. I swiped my key card at the office entrance and got a red light. Tried again, still red. Mr. Garcia, security guard Thompson, was walking toward me with a cardboard box and an uncomfortable expression. I'm sorry, sir, but I need to escort you out. Your access has been revoked. There's been a mistake, Thompson. I'm a partner here. I know, sir, but Mr. Croft left specific instructions. He said to give you this. The box contained my personal items from my office, family photos, my MIT diploma, the signed baseball from our first major project celebration, everything that proved I'd ever existed in this building. Julian appeared in the lobby, perfectly dressed as always, his face a mask of concerned friendship. Mateo, thank God you're okay. After last night I had to take precautions. You threatened to burn it all down. I can't risk our employees' livelihoods. The lobby was full of our staff arriving for work, and Julian's voice carried just enough for them to hear. Their confused faces turned from me to Julian, looking for answers. I never threatened anything, I said quietly, but Julian was already addressing the crowd. Everyone, I need you to know that Mateo is going through a difficult time right now. If he contacts any of you directly, please let me know immediately. We're all hoping he gets the help he needs. I stood there holding my box of memories, watching 15 years of professional relationships evaporate in 30 seconds. Julian had turned my firing into a public intervention, complete with concerned witnesses who would later testify to my erratic behavior. Friday afternoon, 2:00 p.m. I drove to the Meridian Hotel for the final vendor walkthrough, hoping to find some normalcy in the wedding preparations. Sarah had specifically asked me to check on the floral arrangements since I'd helped design the ballroom's layout. But when I approached the wedding planner, Rebecca, her smile faltered. Oh, Mateo, I thought Julian told you you're no longer involved in the vendor coordination. He said you needed space to work through some things. Mental health is so important. I'm still the best man, Rebecca. I just wanted to check on. Julian's handling everything now. He's been so amazing, taking on all these extra responsibilities while you focus on getting better. She touched my arm with practiced sympathy. Maybe you should use this time to rest. I walked through the ballroom where workers were setting up centerpieces, hanging lights, arranging chairs for tomorrow's ceremony. My architectural creation was being transformed into Julian's perfect wedding venue, and I'd been erased from the process entirely. That's when I spotted Marcus Chen, the hotel's AV manager, adjusting the projection system. Marcus had worked with me during the building's design phase, and he was one of the few people who knew the technical systems better than anyone. Marcus, I called out, walking over to the control booth. Mateo, good to see you, man. Just running final checks on the projection system for tomorrow's reception. Your acoustic design is still perfect, best sound distribution I've ever worked with. Finally, someone who still treated me like a human being instead of a mental health crisis. Everything looking good for the photo slideshow? I asked casually. Oh yeah, crystal clear on all screens. Julian's assistant sent over the files this morning. Should be a beautiful presentation. Marcus paused, studying my face. You okay, man? You look like you haven't slept. I managed a smile. Wedding stress, you know how it is. At least Marcus still saw me as the architect who designed this space, not the unstable partner Julian was painting me to be. Friday morning, 9:00 a.m. While I was being escorted out of my own office, Julian was 3 steps ahead, making calls to our biggest clients. I found out when I tried calling the Hendricks Group from my car. I'd built a relationship with them over 5 years, designing 3 major projects that had transformed their portfolio. Mr. Garcia, Margaret Hendricks' assistant, said carefully, I'm afraid Mrs. Hendricks can't take your call right now. Mr. Croft contacted us yesterday about your situation. My situation. He explained about your deteriorating mental state and asked us to report any direct contact from you as a sign that your breakdown is getting worse. Maybe you should focus on getting help instead of business right now. The call ended and I sat in my car outside the office building I'd helped design, understanding the full scope of Julian's strategy. He hadn't just fired me, he'd preemptively destroyed my ability to fight back by turning every client contact into evidence of my mental instability. I tried Morrison Development next, same script, then the Riverside Cultural Center, same response. Julian had spent the morning systematically poisoning every professional relationship I'd built over 15 years, turning my own clients into weapons against me. Friday evening, 6:00 p.m. I was sitting in my car outside the hotel, watching wedding guests arrive for the rehearsal dinner when Sarah knocked on my passenger window. Mateo, what are you doing out here? I rolled down the window and she slid into the passenger seat, her rehearsal dress rustling against the leather. I needed some air, I said. Big day tomorrow. Sarah was quiet for a moment, staring at her engagement ring. Can I tell you something? Julian's been acting so strange lately, cold, calculating, like he's managing me instead of marrying me. My heart jumped, finally someone else who was seeing through Julian's mask. What do you mean? He's been making all these decisions without consulting me. The guest list, the vendors, even the honeymoon itinerary. When I ask questions, he says he's handling everything like I'm some kind of business problem to solve. She looked at me with worried eyes. I love Julian, but lately he's been so calculating about people, like they're just assets to be managed. This was it. This was my chance to find an ally, someone who could see what Julian really was. Sarah, I need to tell you something about Julian and the business. Oh God, not you too. Her expression shifted, sympathy replacing concern. Julian told me you might try to involve me in your paranoid theories about the company. He's so worried about you, Mateo. The hope crashed out of my chest. Even Sarah, sweet, observant Sarah, who just described Julian's manipulative behavior perfectly, had been primed to dismiss anything I said as mental illness. He loves you so much, she continued, but he's scared you're having some kind of breakdown. Promise me you'll get help after the wedding, for Julian's sake. I nodded numbly as she squeezed my hand and got out of the car. Through the windshield, I watched her walk back into the hotel, back to Julian's carefully constructed reality where I was the problem that needed to be managed. All week while Julian was systematically destroying my life, I'd been doing research of my own. Tuesday night through Friday, I'd spent hours reviewing our partnership agreements, client contracts, and business relationships with new eyes. What I discovered changed everything. Every major client contract renewal over the past 5 years had gone through me personally. Every emergency call, every project crisis, every relationship-building dinner, they'd all involved me directly while Julian focused on big-picture strategy. Julian had been taking credit for my work in emails, but he'd never actually tested whether our clients were loyal to him or to the person who'd been solving their problems for years. Friday evening, while Julian was playing the concerned friend at the rehearsal dinner, I started making calls. Not to beg or explain or defend myself, but to offer something Julian couldn't match. Mrs. Hendricks, this is Mateo Garcia. I understand Julian spoke with you about my departure from the firm. I wanted you to know that I'm starting my own company, Garcia and Associates, and I'd love to discuss continuing our working relationship. Mateo, we've worked with you for 8 years. Julian, who? We hired you, not some firm. One by one, I called every major client we'd ever had. The Morrison Group, the Riverside Cultural Center, the Downtown Development Consortium. The same story repeated. They knew my work, trusted my expertise, and had no particular loyalty to Julian Croft. Every contract renewal, every project expansion, every emergency call, they all went through me. Julian's never actually tested whether they're loyal to him or to the person who delivers. By Friday night, I had preliminary agreements from 5 major clients representing 80% of Croft and Garcia's revenue. They were willing to follow me to my new firm, taking their multi-million-dollar projects with them. Julian thought he was firing his junior partner. Instead, he was about to discover that he'd built his empire on a foundation that was walking away. The best man's speech was going to be very educational. Friday night, 9:30 p.m. The rehearsal dinner was in full swing at the hotel's elegant private dining room. I stood at the edge of the gathering, watching Julian work the crowd with his characteristic charm when he clinked his champagne glass for attention. Everyone, I need to share something with you, Julian announced, his voice carrying that perfect blend of strength and vulnerability he'd mastered over the years. As you know, my best friend Mateo has been going through a difficult time lately. All eyes turned to me and I felt my face burning with humiliation. Julian's parents nodded sympathetically. Sarah's family looked concerned but unsurprised. Even my own parents seemed worried and confused, probably wondering why I looked so haggard and desperate. Mateo asked me if he could step back from his best man duties tomorrow. He's worried that his personal struggles might overshadow our special day. Julian's voice cracked slightly, and I watched him wipe away what might have been a real tear. I told him that's what friendship means, supporting each other through the hard times. The crowd murmured approvingly. Julian was being painted as the loyal friend making sacrifices for his troubled buddy, while I stood there looking exactly like the unstable partner everyone expected me to be. Marcus will be stepping in as best man tomorrow, Julian continued, gesturing to one of his groomsmen. But Mateo will always be my brother, and I love him too much to let him suffer in silence. Sometimes you have to save people from themselves. The applause was gentle, sympathetic, directed at Julian's noble gesture rather than any support for me. I was being erased from the wedding party at my own public intervention. As the crowd dispersed back to their conversations, Julian approached me with a champagne flute and that familiar smile. But when he leaned in close, his voice dropped to a whisper only I could hear. Thanks for being my best man, Mateo. You're fired after the honeymoon. He straightened up, clinked his glass against mine, and walked away, leaving me standing alone in a room full of people who all believed I was having a mental breakdown. Friday afternoon, 1:00 p.m. Julian's penthouse office felt like a courtroom, and I was the defendant facing execution. The fabricated embezzlement evidence was spread across his mahogany conference table like a prosecutor's closing argument. Bank statements showing mysterious transfers, invoices for services that never existed, my forged signature on documents I'd never seen. Julian had spent months building a criminal case against me with the same meticulous attention he brought to his architectural designs. 23 years on the bench teaches you that desperate men do desperate things, Mr. Garcia, Judge Harrison Blackwell said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he reviewed the fake documents. His voice carried the same authority he wielded in his courtroom, and his presence in Julian's office made this feel terrifyingly official. My son-in-law is being generous, offering you a quiet exit. Julian leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled, watching me process the scope of his betrayal. The criminal charges would be devastating, Mateo. Wire fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty. We're talking federal prison time. My mouth felt like sandpaper. This is all fabricated, you know. I never. What I know, Judge Blackwell interrupted, is that you have access to company accounts, signing authority on contracts, and a history of erratic behavior that multiple witnesses can confirm. A jury would see a man who built elaborate schemes to steal from his own company. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Julian had positioned himself as the victim of my theft when he was the one stealing everything I'd built, but his fabricated evidence was flawless, complete with a paper trail going back months. Hidden in the corner behind a potted plant, Marcus Chen's recording device captured every word of their conspiracy. Julian had no idea that his perfect crime was being documented in real time. Walk away quietly, Julian said, his voice almost gentle. Resign for health reasons. We'll say you're taking time to address personal issues. No criminal charges, no public humiliation, just disappear. I stared at my best friend's face, searching for any trace of the man who'd cried when he asked me to be his best man. But there was nothing there except cold calculation and the satisfaction of a predator who'd cornered his prey. And if I refuse? Judge Blackwell's smile was razor-thin. Then you'll discover how creative federal prosecutors can be when presented with such compelling evidence of financial crimes. Friday evening, 7:00 p.m. I was sitting alone in my car outside the hotel when Sarah tapped on my passenger window. For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe she'd seen through Julian's lies. Maybe I finally had an ally. She slid into the passenger seat, and I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Mateo, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Of course, anything. Julian showed me some emails you sent him, accusations about the business, threats about ruining the wedding. He's really worried about you. Her voice was soft, concerned, but there was something else underneath it. Fear. My chest tightened. Sarah, whatever Julian showed you. He said you might deny it, that you might not even remember sending them because of your condition. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to screenshots of emails I'd never written. Messages filled with paranoid rants about Julian stealing from me, threats to expose everything at the wedding. The fabrication was masterful. Julian had captured my writing style perfectly, even included details only I would know about our projects. To anyone reading them, I looked like a man spiraling into dangerous delusion. I never sent these, Sarah. Julian is manipulating you, just like he's manipulating everyone else. Her expression shifted from concern to something approaching pity. That's exactly what he said you'd say. Mateo, these came from your email account. Julian forwarded them to me directly. Of course they did. Julian had probably hacked my email months ago, sending messages to himself from my account to build his evidence file. Every denial I made just proved his point about my deteriorating mental state. Julian was right. You really are having some kind of paranoid episode. I'm calling security if you come near our wedding. She got out of the car, leaving me alone with the crushing realization that my last potential ally had become another weapon in Julian's arsenal. He hadn't just isolated me, he'd turned my own desperate attempts to find help into proof of my instability. Friday night, 9:30 p.m. The rehearsal dinner was in full swing at the hotel's elegant private dining room. I stood at the edge of the gathering, watching Julian work the crowd with his characteristic charm when he clinked his champagne glass for attention. Everyone, I need to share something with you, Julian announced, his voice carrying that perfect blend of strength and vulnerability he'd mastered over the years. As you know, my best friend Mateo has been going through a difficult time lately. All eyes turned to me and I felt my face burning with humiliation. Julian's parents nodded sympathetically. Sarah's family looked concerned but unsurprised. Even my own parents seemed worried and confused, probably wondering why I looked so haggard and desperate. Mateo asked me if he could step back from his best man duties tomorrow. He's worried that his personal struggles might overshadow our special day. Julian's voice cracked slightly, and I watched him wipe away what might have been a real tear. I told him that's what friendship means, supporting each other through the hard times. The crowd murmured approvingly. Julian was being painted as the loyal friend making sacrifices for his troubled buddy, while I stood there looking exactly like the unstable partner everyone expected me to be. Marcus will be stepping in as best man tomorrow, Julian continued, gesturing to one of his groomsmen. But Mateo will always be my brother, and I love him too much to let him suffer in silence. Sometimes you have to save people from themselves. The applause was gentle, sympathetic, directed at Julian's noble gesture rather than any support for me. I was being erased from the wedding party at my own public intervention. As the crowd dispersed back to their conversations, Julian approached me with a champagne flute and that familiar smile. But when he leaned in close, his voice dropped to a whisper only I could hear. "Thanks for being my best man, Mateo. You're fired after the honeymoon." He straightened up, clinked his glass against mine, and walked away, leaving me standing alone in a room full of people who all believed I was having a mental breakdown. Friday night, 11:45 p.m. I sat alone in my car outside the hotel, watching the last of the rehearsal dinner guests stumble out into the cool night air. My parents had left an hour ago, looking worried and whispering to each other about whether they should stage an intervention. Julian's performance had been flawless. The hotel's facade was lit up against the dark sky, every architectural detail I'd designed glowing perfectly. Even in my darkest moment, I felt a surge of pride looking at what I'd created. Julian could steal credit, fabricate evidence, and destroy relationships, but he couldn't take away what I'd built with my own hands. My phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "Get some rest, buddy. Tomorrow's going to be a big day for both of us." I stared at that message, feeling something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. For 6 days, I'd been playing defense, trying to prove my innocence, begging people to see through Julian's lies. Every private approach had been countered, every relationship poisoned, every escape route blocked. But Julian had made one crucial mistake. He'd insisted I remain as best man, even after publicly humiliating me. He wanted me to stand there tomorrow, smile for the cameras, and toast his success right before he destroyed my life. He wanted me complicit in my own execution. The rage that had been burning in my chest for days suddenly went cold and focused. I wasn't the victim of Julian's plan anymore. I was the architect of his destruction. "You want me to be your best man, Julian?" I whispered to the empty car, my reflection staring back from the dark window. "Perfect. I'll give the best man's speech of your fucking life." I started the engine and drove home, my mind already racing through the technical specifications of the hotel's projection system, the guest list full of our clients, and the beautiful irony of destroying Julian's empire in the building I'd designed myself. The veils were off, the war was on. Saturday morning, 10:00 a.m. The law offices of Blackwell and Associates felt like a tribunal, with Julian's fabricated evidence displayed on easels like courtroom exhibits. My parents sat across from me at the polished conference table, their faces pale with shock and betrayal. Judge Blackwell commanded the room from behind his massive desk, while Julian sat beside him playing the role of reluctant prosecutor. The investors, including my parents, had been summoned for an emergency disclosure meeting about financial irregularities in the firm. "The evidence is unfortunately conclusive," Judge Blackwell announced, gesturing to the fabricated bank statements and forged invoices. "Mr. Garcia has been systematically embezzling funds from client accounts over the past 18 months. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared at the documents with the same expression he'd worn when the doctor told him about his heart condition, complete devastation. "The total amount stolen appears to be approximately $800,000, Julian said, his voice heavy with regret. "I discovered it during routine financial reviews this week. I wanted to handle this privately, give Mateo a chance to make things right, but the scope of the theft." He trailed off, letting the investors fill in the blanks about his noble reluctance to prosecute his best friend. "But what about our investment?" asked Mrs. Henderson, one of Julian's college friends who'd put $50,000 into the firm. "Are we going to lose everything because of his theft?" Julian's expression brightened with calculated optimism. "That's why I called this meeting. I'm personally guaranteeing all investor returns. The firm's reputation and your financial security are my top priorities." The hardest part is that Mateo's parents invested their retirement savings just months before I discovered his theft, Julian continued, looking directly at my mother with perfect sympathy. "I blame myself for not catching this sooner." My parents' life savings, their trust in Julian, their pride in their son's success. Julian was destroying everything in one surgical strike, positioning himself as the hero protecting innocent investors from their criminal son. I sat there in silence, knowing that any defense I offered would only make me look more guilty. Julian had built his case too perfectly, and every word I spoke would be twisted into evidence of my desperation. Saturday afternoon, 2:00 p.m. My home office looked like a crime scene, boxes packed with 15 years of memories, legal papers scattered across my desk, eviction notices, restraining orders, criminal complaints. The answering machine blinked with 17 messages I couldn't bear to play. But I forced myself to listen to the last one, my mother's voice breaking through the speaker. "Mijo, we don't understand what happened. We love you, but we can't. We can't lose our house. Julian says if we testify about your behavior, he won't press charges. Please call us, please." Julian had given my parents a choice: testify against their son or lose their retirement savings and their home. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, turning my own family into weapons against me while making himself look merciful. I sat in my empty chair, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, and felt something break inside my chest. Not my spirit, that had crystallized into something harder than steel, but my last connection to the man I used to be, the man who believed in friendship and trust and playing by the rules. That man was dead. Julian had killed him as surely as if he put a bullet in his head. But Julian had made one fatal error in his perfect plan. He'd left me alive, and he'd insisted I give the best man's speech at his wedding. In 6 hours, I'd be standing in front of 300 guests in the ballroom I'd designed, with access to the projection system I'd specified, addressing the clients whose loyalty he'd never actually tested. "You took my company, my reputation, my family, my friends," I said to the empty room, my voice steady despite the chaos around me. "But you can't take what I built with my own hands." I opened my laptop and began typing the speech that would end Julian Croft's world. The foundation was about to reclaim everything the vision had stolen. Saturday afternoon, 3:00 p.m. My phone buzzed with the final confirmation I'd been waiting for. Morrison Development's signed letter of intent to transfer their $12 million project portfolio to Garcia and Associates. I sat in my car outside the Meridian Hotel, watching wedding vendors make last-minute deliveries, as I forwarded Julian's damning email alongside my new company's incorporation papers to each client. The same email where he'd called me the numbers guy and outlined his plan to fire me after the honeymoon. One by one, the responses came in. "Mr. Garcia, we've worked with you for 8 years. Julian, who, we hired you, not some firm. Margaret Hendricks. Mateo, you designed our headquarters. Julian just showed up for photo ops. Count us in. Morrison Development. The Cultural Center project was your vision. We follow the architect, not the company name. Riverside Cultural Board." By 3:30, I had signed commitments from 5 major clients representing 80% of Croft and Garcia's revenue. Julian thought he was firing his junior partner. He had no idea he was about to discover that his empire was built on a foundation that was walking away. I forwarded the final package to my lawyer with instructions to file the incorporation papers Monday morning. Garcia and Associates would be operational before Julian returned from his honeymoon, assuming he still took one after tonight. The irony was perfect. Julian had spent months systematically destroying my reputation, but he'd never actually tested whether our clients were loyal to his vision or to the man who'd been solving their problems for 15 years. Saturday afternoon, 4:00 p.m. I walked through the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, the building I'd designed from foundation to rooftop, carrying a simple USB drive that would end Julian's world. Marcus Chen was running final checks on the projection system, the same system I'd specified during the building's design phase. The massive screens flanked the head table where I'd be standing in 3 hours, and the acoustic design I'd created would carry every word to the farthest corner of the room. "Everything looking good for tonight?" I asked Marcus, my voice casual despite the nuclear weapon in my pocket. "Perfect as always," Marcus replied, adjusting the control panel. "Your acoustic design is still the best I've ever worked with. Crystal clear sound distribution, no dead zones." I nodded, studying the projection angles I'd calculated years ago. "Mind if I test the backup connection? Wouldn't want any technical difficulties during the most important speech." Marcus handed me the secondary input cable, and I discreetly connected my phone to upload Julian's email to the system's backup drive. The file would be ready to display with a single button press from the wireless remote I'd palmed from the control booth. "Just making sure the projector works perfectly, Marcus. Wouldn't want any technical difficulties during the most important speech." The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Julian had chosen this venue specifically because it showcased our architectural success. He wanted to celebrate his triumph in a building that represented our partnership. Instead, he'd given me the perfect stage to destroy him using the very systems I'd designed. Every technical specification, every sight line, every acoustic calculation, I'd built this room to ensure perfect communication. Tonight, it would communicate the truth about Julian Croft with devastating clarity. Saturday afternoon, 5:00 p.m. I stood at Julian's side during the ceremony, playing the perfect best man while 300 guests watched our friendship's final performance. Judge Harrison Blackwell officiated with smug satisfaction, his voice carrying the same authority he'd used to threaten me with fabricated criminal charges just yesterday. Sarah looked radiant in her Vera Wang gown, completely unaware that her father and new husband had spent the week conspiring to destroy her best man. "Do you, Julian, take Sarah to be your wife for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health?" Judge Blackwell asked, his eyes twinkling with private amusement. Julian's voice rang out clear and confident. "I do." "You're about to find out what poorer looks like," I thought, watching him slip the wedding ring onto Sarah's finger. The same hands that had forged my signature on embezzlement documents now trembled slightly with wedding day nerves. I scanned the crowd during the vows, mentally cataloging the faces that would witness Julian's destruction in 4 hours. Margaret Hendricks sat in the third row, right side. Morrison Development's entire board occupied a table near the front. The Riverside Cultural Center's chairman was chatting with other guests during the processional. 5 major clients scattered throughout the reception seating, all of whom had signed letters of intent to abandon Julian's firm. They had no idea they were about to become active participants in the most spectacular business divorce in the city's history. "You may kiss the bride," Judge Blackwell announced, and Julian pulled Sarah into a passionate embrace while the crowd erupted in applause. I clapped along with everyone else, my face a mask of best man joy, while the USB drive in my pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Saturday evening, 9:47 p.m. The moment had arrived. I stood at the head table with the wireless remote hidden in my palm, looking out at 300 wedding guests who had no idea they were about to witness a massacre. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying perfectly through the acoustic system I designed, "they say every great structure needs 2 things, vision and foundation." Julian raised his champagne flute toward me, that familiar cocky grin spreading across his face. The same grin he'd worn when he asked me to be his best man. The same grin he'd had when he planned to fire me after this reception. "Julian has always been the vision of our partnership," I continued, watching his smile widen with satisfaction. "He sees the big picture, the grand design, the beautiful possibilities that others miss." The crowd murmured approvingly. Sarah squeezed Julian's hand, beaming with pride at her new husband's public recognition. "But vision requires foundation," I said, my thumb finding the remote's activation button. "And Julian forgot something crucial about foundations. They're what everything else is built on." I pressed the button and Julian's email filled the massive screens behind me. "Mateo has served his purpose as the technical foundation, but vision requires a singular voice." The firm's future depends on streamlined leadership, and frankly, clients respond better to a single point of contact. I recommend we transition Mateo out within 60 days of my return from honeymoon. The ballroom erupted in gasps and confused murmurs. Julian's face went white as his own words condemned him in front of everyone he tried to impress. Sarah stared at the screens in horror, reading her husband's plan to fire his best friend right after using him as wedding decoration. My best friend made me his best man just to fire me after the wedding, so I gave a toast that destroyed his life. Vision without foundation crumbles, Julian, I said into the stunned silence. But foundation without vision, that builds empires. Saturday evening, 9:49 p.m. Julian lunged toward the projection controls, but I was already pulling out the signed letters of intent, my voice cutting through his desperate damage control. Before anyone asks about context or explanations, I announced, holding up the documents, I should mention that I spent this week reaching out to our clients. You know, the foundation of any architectural firm. Julian froze halfway to the control booth, his face cycling through confusion, fear, and dawning horror. Margaret Hendricks, I called out, and she stood slowly in the third row. Would you like to tell Julian about our conversation yesterday? Her voice carried clearly in the perfect acoustics. Mateo designed our headquarters and 3 subsequent projects. We're following him to Garcia and Associates. One by one, I called their names, and one by one, they stood in solidarity. Morrison Development, $12 million in active projects, transferring to Garcia and Associates. Riverside Cultural Center, $8 million expansion project, transferring to Garcia and Associates. Downtown Development Consortium, $15 million mixed-use complex, transferring to Garcia and Associates. Hendricks Group, $6 million in annual retainer agreements, transferring to Garcia and Associates. Julian stood paralyzed in the middle of the dance floor, watching his empire evaporate in real time as each client declaration hit like a physical blow. These 5 clients represent 80% of your revenue, Julian, I said, my voice steady and professional despite the chaos erupting around us. They've all chosen to work with the man who actually designed their buildings, solved their problems, and earned their trust over 15 years. The mathematical precision of his destruction was beautiful. Julian, the visionary, was about to discover that vision without foundation doesn't just crumble, it disappears entirely. Saturday evening, 9:52 p.m. Judge Blackwell rose from his seat with thunderous authority, his face red with rage as he pointed directly at me. This is harassment and defamation, he bellowed, his voice carrying the weight of 23 years on the bench. Mr. Garcia, you're under arrest for... Actually, Your Honor, Marcus Chen interrupted, stepping forward with a recording device. I believe manufacturing evidence and witness intimidation are felonies. Should I call the FBI? The judge's face went from red to ash gray as Marcus pressed play on yesterday's recording from Julian's office. 23 years on the bench teaches you that desperate men do desperate things, Mr. Garcia. My son-in-law is being generous, offering you a quiet exit. What I know is that you have access to company accounts, signing authority on contracts, and a history of erratic behavior that multiple witnesses can confirm. A jury would see a man who built elaborate schemes to steal from his own company. The ballroom fell silent except for the damning audio of Judge Blackwell and Julian conspiring to frame me with fabricated embezzlement charges. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as she heard her father and new husband plotting to send me to federal prison. The criminal charges would be devastating, Mateo. Wire fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty. We're talking federal prison time, Julian's voice continued from the speakers. Judge Blackwell's judicial authority crumbled as his own words convicted him of conspiracy, evidence tampering, and abuse of office. The wedding guests stared in shock at the corrupt judge who just threatened to arrest someone for exposing his crimes. Your Honor, I said with perfect formality, I believe manufacturing evidence and witness intimidation are felonies. Should I call the FBI, or would you prefer to resign quietly? The foundation had just destroyed the vision's legal protection. Saturday evening, 9:55 p.m. I walked through the chaos toward the exit of my own architectural creation, leaving Julian sitting frozen with his crying bride and disgraced father-in-law. The ballroom I designed echoed with the sound of 300 guests processing the systematic destruction they'd just witnessed. Phones were recording, social media was exploding, and Julian's reputation was dying in real time across every platform. My parents approached me near the exit, their faces showing a mixture of pride and regret that I'd never seen before. "Mijo," my father said quietly, "we're sorry we doubted you." Julian was very convincing. "He fooled all of us, Dad, that was the point." My mother hugged me tightly, whispering, "What about our investment, our retirement?" I pulled out the incorporation papers for Garcia and Associates, showing them the investor protection clause I'd built into the new firm's structure. "Your investment is transferring to my new company along with the clients." Julian's fabricated embezzlement charges just became his real legal problem, not ours. The beautiful irony was complete. Julian had tried to steal my life's work, but he'd actually freed me to build something better. My parents' retirement was secure, my reputation was restored, and my new firm would launch with more clients than most architects see in a decade. "Vision without foundation crumbles, Julian," I said, looking back at the wreckage of his perfect wedding. "But foundation without vision, that builds empires." I walked out of the Meridian Hotel into the cool night air, leaving Julian to explain to his bride why their honeymoon would be spent with bankruptcy lawyers instead of on a beach. Saturday evening, 10:00 p.m. Outside the hotel, Marcus Chen and my loyal clients were gathering in the parking lot, their faces animated with excitement about the new firm they just witnessed being born. Margaret Hendricks approached me with a business card and a smile. "Mateo, I've been in this industry for 20 years and I've never seen someone handle betrayal with such precision. Garcia and Associates has our full support." One by one, the clients who'd stood up in the ballroom came over to shake my hand, solidifying partnerships that would define the next phase of my career. Julian had spent months trying to convince them that he was the visionary and I was just the numbers guy. Instead, he'd given them a perfect demonstration of who actually delivered results. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. "Incorporation papers filed. Garcia and Associates is officially operational. Also, the FBI wants to discuss Judge Blackwell's evidence tampering. Congratulations on your new firm and your old friend's federal charges." I looked back at the Meridian Hotel, its facade glowing against the night sky with the same architectural precision I'd designed years ago. Through the ballroom windows, I could see Julian still sitting at the head table, his empire reduced to an empty shell company and a bride who just learned her husband was a criminal. "Some foundations are worth preserving," I told Marcus as we watched the last of the wedding guests stream out of the hotel. "Others need to be rebuilt from the ground up." The foundation had reclaimed everything the vision had stolen, and tomorrow I'd start building something that would outlast us both. Julian wanted me to be his best man just to humiliate me before destroying my life. Instead, I'd given him a wedding gift he'd never forget, the truth about what happens when you betray the person who built everything you thought you owned. The architect had designed his masterpiece, and it wasn't a building.
Mateo, thank you for your raw honesty. Your story powerfully shows that the real power lies in the unseen foundation, not the flashy vision. Betrayal might sting, but it can forge unbreakable strength. Were you justified in that toast? Comment below, and if these tales resonate, like and subscribe for more unfiltered truths. Remember, veils off, justice on.